All right, so now we're going to take a look at modals. So if you have experience with Bootstrap, then you know what a modal is. It's basically where we have a button, we click it, we have this nice little pop-up with some content. Now we can see the modal content right away. I have that already here. Just by taking the div right here and adding the class of modal and saving, that will actually make the content disappear. Okay, and we can do the same thing for this down here. So this div will give a class of modal and save. That's going to go away. And let's see, did I have another one? Bottom sheet modal. So this right here, I'll also give a class of modal, and it just sets it to hide by default. All right, now what we're going to do is go back up to the first one, and we're going to work on the trigger. Okay, so every modal needs to have some kind of trigger, which is usually a button or a link. So we're going to add a class here. Let's make it look good. We'll put button, we'll put waves effect, and waves dash light. And then we also need to put the class of modal dash trigger. Okay, in addition to that, we need an href, which is going to go to an ID, so it's going to be a hash, and then I'm going to call it modal1. Okay, so that is going to look for a modal with the ID of modal1. So we're going to go down here and give this an ID of modal1, and that's how it knows to use that modal. Okay, and then there's just a couple things we need to add here. So this div should have a class of modal dash content, and this div right here should have a class of modal dash footer. All right, and then this OK right here, I'm going to make this into a button. So let's say actually it's going to be a modal action button, so it'll take a class of modal action, so it'll kind of be built into the modal. I'm also going to give it a class of modal close so that it closes when we click it. Let's do a waves effect, and let's do waves green, and let's do BTN flat. All right, so let's see what that looks like. Okay, so we have our button. If I click it, okay, it's not working because we actually have to initialize the modal. So we're going to go down to the JavaScript, and we're just going to put in our jQuery for the modal class, and we're going to say dot modal. Okay, and that should be enough. There we go. So now we have our modal, we have our OK button. If I click that, that's going to close it automatically. Now we have some options we can put in here. So one is dismissible, and that's true by default, I believe, because if I click and I click outside, it closes. But if we don't want that, we can set it to false. That way, if we click and I click outside, it does not close. I have to actually click OK. All right, but true is the default, and that's what I'm going to leave it at. Another thing we can do is change the speed at which it opens and closes. So in duration will be the open. So let's say 2000, and that should open pretty slow. So you see it comes in, it takes 2 seconds. The default, I think, is 300, and that's really quick. All right, and if we want the out duration, we can do that as well. So we'll say out duration 2000, just to test it out. Comes in quick, dismiss it, and it goes out slow. The default for that, I think, is 200. We can also add a callback for when it opens. So if we say ready, we can set that to a function, and that function can take in the modal and trigger, and then inside here, let's just say console.log, and we'll just say modal opened, and then let's also see what we get for modal and for trigger. All right, so we'll save that. We'll open up our console with F12. Make sure you're on the console, and we'll click, and you can see we get modal opened, and this is what it gives us for the modal. So basically it gives us the div with the ID and all the attributes and stuff. and then this would be the trigger. So this gives us the actual button that triggered it. All right, so if you wanted to do something with that, you could. So let's now go back up here and let's see. So that's just the regular modal. Now let's look at the fixed footer modal. So I'm going to close this up and let's add to the trigger here. So we'll say class equals waves effect, waves light, BTN, and we need our modal trigger. Okay, it also needs to know which modal to call, so that's in the href, and it's going to be the ID of modal 2. All right, so we're going to go down to this div, and let's add the ID of modal 2, and then we're going to add to this class here modal dash fixed dash footer. Okay, and then this div will get the content, the modal content. Okay, and then let's go down to the bottom after all these paragraphs and go to this div, and just like above, we're going to give this a modal footer. And then for the button here, I'm just going to say href equals a hash exclamation, and then we're going to give this a class of modal dash action, also modal close so that it closes. We'll say waves effect, waves green, and button flat. Alright, so let's save that and see what this does. So if we click that, we get our fixed footer modal. What this means is that the footer here that has the button is going to stay fixed, and even if the content stretches outside, it's just going to give us a scroll bar rather than making it a large modal. Okay, so this is good if you want to have like a post or something. Maybe you want a whole blog post inside the modal. So that's what you would use that for. Now we also have something called the bottom sheet modal. So let's go ahead and add our trigger stuff here. I'll actually just copy. Let's see. I'll just grab this whole A tag here and copy it, and we'll paste that here. Except we want to change the ID to modal 3, and then give this an ID of modal 3. And let's also give this class, in addition to modal, we want to add bottom dash sheet. Okay, and then for the footer, we will basically want to do kind of the same thing we did here. So I'm going to copy this whole modal footer div and just paste that here. And then we can save that. Let's see what that does. So what that does is it gives us a modal, but not in the middle of the page. It puts it at the bottom. Okay, so it's a bottom sheet modal. All right, so you have some different options as far as how this displays. So that's going to be it, guys. In the next section, we're going to start to look at some other JavaScript stuff, some components. We're going to look at parallax, and we'll move on to the side nav and some other cool stuff as well. So I will see you in the next section.